Benjamin Oliver Davis Jr. was born on December 18, 1912, in Washington, D.C., into a family that was already breaking barriers in American military history. His father, Benjamin O. Davis Sr., would later become the first African-American general in the United States Army, and his mother, Elnora Dickerson Davis, supported her son with a determination that matched the times they lived in. Growing up in a segregated America, young Benjamin Jr. witnessed firsthand the limitations placed on African Americans. Restaurants, schools, public transportation, and even the military itself divided people based on color. But these barriers did not deter him. Instead, they strengthened his resolve to serve his country and to prove that ability, discipline, and courage mattered more than skin color. From an early age, Davis was fascinated by the idea of flying. Aviation was still a relatively new field in the 1920s, and the idea of a black pilot seemed almost unimaginable to most Americans. Nevertheless, Davis carried that dream with him, despite the fact that no military flight schools were open to African Americans. After excelling in high school, Davis entered the University of Chicago in 1929. But his path soon changed when he applied to the United States Military Academy at West Point. Accepted in 1932, Davis became only the fourth African American to attend the academy. Life at West Point was far from easy. For the 4 years he studied there, his white classmates practiced a silent treatment that was meant to break his spirit. Cadets refused to speak to him outside of official duties. He ate alone, studied alone, and lived isolated in the barracks. Yet, Davis persevered. His strength came from discipline, from an iron sense of purpose, and from the belief that he represented more than just himself. Every day he endured at West Point was a statement that African Americans belonged in the officer corps of the United States Army. When he graduated in 1936, he ranked 35th out of a class of 278 cadets. That achievement was extraordinary given the social environment he endured. Commissioned as a second lieutenant in the infantry, Davis immediately faced the harsh reality of segregation in the U.S. Army. He dreamed of becoming a pilot, but at the time, the U.S. Army Air Corps did not accept black applicants for flight training. Instead, he was assigned to infantry units at Fort Benning, Georgia, and later taught military tactics at Tuskegee Institute, a historically black college in Alabama. Ironically, it was this teaching post that placed him in the right environment when the winds of war began to stir in Europe. By the late 1930s, tensions overseas were escalating. Germany, Italy, and Japan were advancing militarily, and the United States, though still neutral, recognized it might soon be drawn into global conflict. African American leaders, civil rights organizations, and community voices pushed for greater opportunities for black soldiers in the military. The War Department, under increasing pressure, agreed in 1940 to create a training program for African American pilots. This became the foundation of the Tuskegee Airmen program. Davis was selected as one of the first to receive training. In 1941, he began aviation cadet instruction at Tuskegee Army Airfield. Despite skepticism from the War Department, despite widespread prejudice within the military hierarchy, Davis excelled. He earned his wings and commission as a captain in March 1942, becoming one of the first African Americans to complete pilot training in the U.S. Army Air Forces. His leadership skills quickly set him apart. By July 1942, Davis was ordered to command the newly formed 99th Pursuit Squadron, the first all-black flying unit in American history. The creation of this unit was not welcomed by all. Many in the military believed African Americans were unfit for combat aviation. Racist studies from earlier decades falsely claimed black men lacked the intelligence, reflexes, and bravery required for flying. Davis understood that he and his squadron carried the heavy burden of disproving these lies. Every flight, every mission, every formation would serve as evidence against prejudice. His men trained tirelessly. At Tuskegee, they studied flight maneuvers, aerial gunnery, navigation, and formation tactics with the same rigor as their white counterparts. Davis instilled in them strict discipline, demanding precision in both flying and personal conduct. He believed their professionalism on and off the field would be their strongest weapon against doubt. In 1943, Davis was sent overseas to North Africa, where the 99th Pursuit Squadron was attached to the 12th Air Force. Their role was to escort bombers, perform ground attack missions, and challenge Axis aircraft in the skies over the Mediterranean. It was here that Davis and his men began to carve their reputation. In September 1943, critics back in Washington claimed the squadron had underperformed in combat. Some generals even called for their removal from the front lines. Davis, refusing to let prejudice destroy the work of his men, flew back to Washington to defend them. He addressed the War Department with calm but unshakable resolve. He laid out their record, the missions flown, and the progress they had made under fire. His defense was so strong that the program was not only saved but expanded. Soon after, Davis was given command of the 332nd Fighter Group, which included the 99th Squadron and additional Tuskegee units. Promoted to lieutenant colonel, he now commanded one of the most unique fighter groups in the U.S. Army Air Forces. The men of the 332nd would later become known as the Red Tails because of the distinctive red paint on the tails of their P-51 Mustangs. This visual marker would come to symbolize not only their presence in the sky, but their unmatched courage and reliability. As Davis took command, his mission became larger than ever. He was not only a pilot, but also the leader of hundreds of men who bore the weight of proving their worth to an entire nation. Every sortie was a test, not just of their skill, but of the future of integration in the armed forces. Davis approached his role with a mix of strict military discipline and deep personal responsibility. He was known as a demanding leader who expected excellence, but he also cared deeply for his men. He fought not only in the skies, but in the halls of power, ensuring that his pilots received the opportunities and recognition they deserved. His calm authority and determination made him a figure his men respected deeply, and they followed him into combat with confidence. By the end of 1943, Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. was no longer just a young man with a dream of flying. He had become the commander of one of the most historic units in U.S. military history, a symbol of possibility for African Americans and a living challenge to the structures of segregation. His journey from a lonely cadet at West Point to a respected leader in the skies over Europe demonstrated the power of perseverance, courage, and belief in justice. Every step of his early career, every mission flown, and every challenge endured defined him as a hero whose story was only beginning to unfold. When Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. assumed command of the 332nd Fighter Group, the Second World War was at its height. The United States had fully entered the conflict after Pearl Harbor, and the Army Air Forces played a crucial role in Europe and the Mediterranean. For Davis and his men, this was the ultimate proving ground. They were tasked with the same missions as any other fighter group, escorting bombers, protecting ground forces, and challenging Axis fighters in the air. But their performance carried consequences far beyond the battlefield. Each mission was a test of whether African American pilots could meet the highest standards of combat. Each victory, each safe return of bombers, carried symbolic weight across the ocean back home. Under Davis's leadership, the 332nd quickly distinguished itself. Initially flying the P-40 Warhawk and later the P-47 Thunderbolt before receiving the sleek P-51 Mustang, the group took on some of the most dangerous missions of the war. Their bombers, lumbering B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, were frequent targets for the Luftwaffe's formidable fighters. Escorting them required discipline, courage, and skill. Many fighter pilots preferred to break formation and chase enemy aircraft for personal glory. Davis made it clear, the duty of the Red Tails was not to rack up kills, but to stay with the bombers at all costs. This doctrine saved countless American lives. The reputation of the Red Tails began to grow. Bomber crews soon noticed the distinctive red-painted tails of the Mustangs that stayed with them all the way to the target and back. Stories spread that the Red Tails never lost a bomber under their protection, and although later analysis showed they did lose a few, their record remained extraordinary compared to other units. Their consistency, reliability, and discipline became legendary. For the bomber crews flying long, deadly missions over Germany, seeing the Red Tails in the sky meant reassurance, trust, and hope of survival. One of the most significant moments came in June 1944, during the preparations for the Allied invasion of Normandy. Davis and his men provided crucial escort and patrol missions as the Allies sought to weaken German defenses and cut supply lines. Their effectiveness in the air contributed to the broader strategy that made D-Day possible. Later that year, they were heavily engaged in missions deep into enemy territory, including strikes over Austria, Hungary, and Germany itself. On one mission to Berlin in March 1945, the Red Tails fought German jet fighters, the Messerschmitt Me, 262s, among the most advanced aircraft of the war. Despite the technical disadvantage, Davis's pilots shot down several jets, proving their ability to adapt even against cutting-edge technology. Davis himself flew 60 combat missions. His calm in the cockpit, his precision in aerial maneuvers, and his ability to inspire his men under fire made him a respected leader, not just in name, but in action. He did not ask of his pilots anything he would not do himself. His presence in the air gave his men confidence, and his strict enforcement of discipline ensured that their mission remained focused. The 302nd Fighter Group's success did not go unnoticed. In July 1944, Davis was promoted to full colonel. By the end of the war, his unit had flown over 15,000 sorties, destroyed more than 260 enemy aircraft in the air, and damaged or destroyed hundreds more on the ground. They also destroyed rail lines, transport vehicles, and even sunk a German destroyer. For their service, the group earned a Distinguished Unit Citation, and individual pilots received numerous Distinguished Flying Crosses, Silver Stars, and Air Medals. Perhaps just as important as their combat record was their effect on perceptions back home. The Tuskegee Airmen's performance under Davis's leadership directly challenged the deeply entrenched stereotypes about African American soldiers. In a military still fully segregated, their excellence provided undeniable evidence that skill and bravery knew no racial boundaries. For Davis, each successful mission was not only a blow against the Luftwaffe, but also against the walls of prejudice that confined his people. Despite their record, prejudice persisted. Some senior officers remained skeptical or dismissive, but Davis refused to allow bitterness to define his leadership. He responded to every doubt with performance. He insisted that his men maintain impeccable standards in uniform, behavior, and flight discipline. He knew that they were being watched not just as individuals, but as representatives of their entire race. Their conduct would either open doors for future generations or risk closing them for decades. In the final months of the war, the Red Tails continued to distinguish themselves. Escorting bombers over heavily defended German cities, they faced anti-aircraft fire, poor weather, and relentless Luftwaffe opposition. Their ability to keep losses low among bombers became a point of pride, not only within the unit, but throughout the air forces. By April 1945, as Allied forces closed in on Berlin, Davis's men had firmly established themselves as one of the premier fighter groups in the theater. The group's effectiveness became so well known that bomber crews often requested red tail escort. Pilots and gunners wrote home about the comfort of seeing those red fins against the blue sky, a signal that they had the best guardians above. Davis's strict orders not to abandon the bombers frustrated some younger pilots eager for personal glory, but his doctrine paid dividends. Their record of protecting bombers became one of the best in the entire Army Air Forces. In a war where thousands of lives depended on whether heavy bombers returned safely, this achievement was invaluable. After Germany's surrender in May 1945, Davis and his pilots returned to the United States as heroes, though still to a country deeply divided by race. Their combat record was undeniable. The Red Tails had flown with distinction, proved their worth, and set new standards for excellence. Davis, at only 33 years old, had already become one of the most prominent African-American military leaders in history. His exploits during the war cemented his reputation as a disciplined commander, a courageous pilot, and a pioneer. But they also prepared him for the next stage of his career. The war had shown the capabilities of African-American servicemen beyond question. The task that lay ahead was to turn wartime performance into peacetime progress, to push for integration, recognition, and equality within the armed forces. Davis was ready to lead that fight. The Second World War was the crucible that tested Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. and forged him into a leader of lasting significance. From the skies over North Africa to the heart of Germany, he proved himself time and again. He faced not only the dangers of combat, but also the weight of expectation, the burden of prejudice, and the responsibility of being a symbol. Through it all, his composure never wavered, His discipline never faltered, and his vision never narrowed. He fought not just for victory in war, but for a greater victory, the recognition of equality. His record and that of his men became a cornerstone for the eventual desegregation of the U.S. Armed Forces, showing that excellence, when allowed to flourish, could reshape the destiny of a nation. When the guns of the Second World War finally fell silent, Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. returned to the United States not simply as a decorated combat commander, but as a symbol of what African American servicemen could achieve when given the chance to prove themselves. Yet the country he came home to in 1945 remained deeply segregated. Jim Crow laws still controlled much of civilian life, and within the military itself, separation by race was enforced as a matter of policy. The Tuskegee Airmen had fought with distinction, but the question now was whether their service would bring lasting change. Davis, only 33 years old, had already commanded one of the most celebrated fighter groups of the war. His reputation as a strict disciplinarian, a cool leader under pressure, and a pilot of great skill earned him respect among his men and recognition from higher command. Still, as a black officer in a segregated system, he faced the challenge of navigating a career where opportunities were far narrower than for his white counterparts. He knew that his work was far from finished. In the years immediately after the war, Davis remained in the Army Air Forces, which in 1947 became an independent branch, the United States Air Force. This change created a new environment where Davis could continue to serve and perhaps influence policy. His wartime record made him impossible to ignore. Yet he still faced resistance. Many within the senior ranks doubted the future of African American officers. Davis understood that he had to maintain impeccable standards, not just for himself, but for those who would follow. Every assignment he accepted, every unit he commanded, every speech he gave would either reinforce or challenge the stereotypes that had long restricted black servicemen. The critical turning point came in 1948 when President Harry S. Truman issued Executive Order 9981, which mandated the desegregation of the armed forces. This order was a landmark in American history, and it owed much to the performance of Davis and the Tuskegee Airmen during the war. Their combat record had stripped away the last credible arguments that segregation was justified on military grounds. Truman's decision required courage, and the record of the Red Tails gave him the evidence he needed. Davis became one of the most visible figures in this new era. As the Air Force integrated, he was assigned to leadership positions that tested his ability to bring white and black servicemen together into cohesive units. He succeeded by applying the same principles that had guided him at West Point and during the war: discipline, fairness, and professionalism. His reputation grew not only as a pioneer, but as an officer who could command respect across racial lines. In the 1950s, Davis's career advanced steadily. He served at various posts, including assignments in Europe and Asia. During the Korean War, he played a role in planning and administration rather than direct combat, but his influence was no less significant. His experience as a combat leader gave him credibility, and his presence as a senior African American officer in an integrated force symbolized the progress the military was making, even as civilian society lagged behind. By the early 1960s, Davis had risen to the rank of brigadier general, becoming the first African American general officer in the U.S. Air Force. This achievement echoed the earlier barrier breaking of his father, Benjamin O. Davis, Sr., who had become the first black general in the U.S. Army. Father and son thus embodied a generational legacy of perseverance against the odds. For Davis, Jr., the promotion was both personal recognition and a national milestone. It proved that African American officers could rise to the highest levels of command. As a general, Davis held significant assignments. He commanded air defense forces in the Philippines, served as chief of staff for U.S. forces in Korea, and later returned to Europe in key leadership roles within NATO structures. His career placed him at the center of Cold War strategy, where he worked alongside allied officers from many nations. In every post, his professionalism left a mark, reinforcing the respect he had earned during the war. In 1965, Davis was promoted to lieutenant general, one of only a handful of three-star generals in the Air Force at the time. His final major assignment was as chief of staff for United States Air Forces in Europe, headquartered in Wiesbaden, Germany. In this role, he oversaw complex operations during a tense period of the Cold War, ensuring the readiness of American forces stationed across the continent. His leadership was not symbolic alone, it was operational and strategic, contributing directly to the defense of the Western Alliance. Davis retired from active duty in 1970, closing a distinguished military career that had spanned more than 3 decades. He left the Air Force as a lieutenant general, one of its most respected leaders. But retirement did not end his service to the nation. In the years that followed, Davis held various government positions, including Director of Civil Aviation Security for the Department of Transportation. In that role, he worked on policies to protect air travel, years before airline security became a central concern in American life. Throughout his post-war years, Davis remained a public figure who represented both military excellence and the broader struggle for civil rights. His story was told in books, articles, and later documentaries, ensuring that new generations learned about the Tuskegee Airmen and the barriers they had overcome. He often spoke at events honoring veterans and at commemorations of the airmen's service. His speeches carried the authority of a man who had lived through the harshest forms of prejudice, yet never let bitterness cloud his commitment to duty. In 1998, nearly 3 decades after his retirement, Davis received a final honor that recognized the full scope of his service. President Bill Clinton advanced him to the rank of full general, 4 stars, on the retired list of the United States Air Force. The promotion was both symbolic and substantive. It placed him alongside the most senior figures in Air Force history and acknowledged that his career had been one of extraordinary importance. Davis, then in his 80s, accepted the honor with the same dignity that had marked his entire life. His legacy endures in multiple dimensions. On the one hand, he is remembered as a combat commander whose red tails protected thousands of bomber crews during the Second World War. On the other, he is celebrated as a pioneer whose career paved the way for integration in the armed forces. Beyond that, he stands as an American hero whose perseverance under isolation at West Point, under scrutiny in combat, and under prejudice in peacetime demonstrated the highest ideals of service. The Tuskegee Airmen themselves became icons of American history, and Davis was their most prominent leader. Their story has been told in films, honored in museums, and commemorated in countless ceremonies. For Davis, the recognition of his men was always central. He never sought personal glory, but consistently emphasized the collective achievement of the airmen who had flown with him. Their legacy, he argued, was proof that opportunity must be based on ability, not race. Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. passed away on July 4, 2002, an almost symbolic date for a man who had spent his life in service to the ideals of freedom and equality. He was buried with full honors at Arlington National Cemetery, near his father. His grave is visited by thousands each year, a reminder of the journey from isolation at West Point to 4-star generalship, from doubt and exclusion to recognition and honor. His life continues to inspire. For young cadets at the Air Force Academy, for students of history, for those who believe in the progress of justice, Davis's example is one of unbreakable resolve. His discipline and fairness demonstrated that true leadership transcends prejudice. His career proved that when barriers fall, excellence rises. The legacy of Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. is therefore not confined to the history of aviation or even the history of the armed forces. It is woven into the larger fabric of American progress. He showed that the military, often a reflection of society's divisions, could also become a model of integration and equal opportunity. The desegregation of the armed forces in 1948 was one of the earliest victories of the civil rights movement, and Davis's role in making it possible was profound. Today, the name of Davis is enshrined in Air Force bases, schools, and streets across the nation. The Tuskegee Airmen, once doubted and dismissed, are celebrated as heroes. Their red-tailed Mustangs are painted on murals, displayed in museums, and remembered in ceremonies across the world. And at the center of that legacy stands Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., the cadet who endured silence, the pilot who led in combat, the general who rose to the top, and the American who proved that dignity, courage, and discipline can change history.